Welcome to Do More with Your Money. On today's podcast episode, I am joined by Jay Zigmont, founder of Childfree Wealth. Jay is a life and business coach who specializes in financial planning for those who are child free or permanently childless. While most financial advice treats parenthood as the default, Dr. Jay has created a life and financial planning system that centers the unique needs of those whose futures don't include kids. Dr. J has a PhD in adult learning from the University of Connecticut and is a fee only, advice only fiduciary and certified financial planner. He's also the author of the book Portraits of Child Free Wealth and the co host of the Child Free Life and Money podcast. So, Jay, thank you so much for coming on Do More with Your Money. And I'm really excited to talk to you today.
So happy to be here, TJ. I'm always into what are we doing with our money? So this is perfect.
Awesome. Yeah, me as well. Like we were talking about a little bit before the podcast episode, is do more with your money can mean a lot of different things. Okay. And so we don't always want to focus on just the technical aspects of how do we maximize our money from a return on investment standpoint. So I'm really excited to talk to you about the specifics of serving your niche and understanding kind of what are some of the unique ways that people are using their money and yeah, just getting your expertise. So I always want to start with why. I think that's really important. So I'd love to just hear why you chose to specialize in serving child-free and permanently childless people.
Yeah. And first, just kind of like clarification. So child free in my world means you don't have kids, aren't planning on having kids. So some people are like, oh, I'm child free for the weekend. No, that's not the point. It's like these are about 25% of the US that never going to have kids. And my wife and I are child free. And when I was studying to become a certified financial planner, what was interesting is there's never once a mention in any of the education I did about being child free. It's all either pre-kids, post-kids, emptiness, planning for college, everything. And I started on this path, and both my wife and I were PhDs, and I started kind of researching the question of like, how weird are I know we're weird, like just kind of we are. We'll sit around at night talking about research studies. Like how weird are we? And come to find out, there's millions and millions of people that are child free, but nearly all financial planning assumes you're gonna have kids, and that becomes a problem. And TJ and I actually both came out of the XY world, and you're always taught you got to find a niche, you got to find a group. And one of the problems is if you find a group that's nobody's serving, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Right, right.
In the research world, we say just because there's a gap in the research doesn't mean you should fill it. And come to find out, it's been great. But it's one of those like, you got to step out there and say, all right, I'm going to serve somebody that nobody else is serving. Maybe there's a reason, but it's just a huge need. I mean, there's if 20% of the US, that's kind of the estimate we're going with, is child free, there's only one financial planning firm, as far as I know, dedicated to serving them. That's way too many people that I can handle.
Yeah, it sounds like a blue ocean strategy to me. And obviously, they have their own unique issues that they're going to deal with over the course of their lifetime. And so, I guess that's the next question I'd like to segue in with you is what are some unique financial planning risks that child free people may experience during their life?
So the way we look at it is living a life of child-free wealth means you have time, money, and freedom to do what you enjoy. It does not automatically make you rich. It's not like there's money just comes up and drops off on your doorstep. But the difference is that amount of flexibility means they're not following what we call the standard life script. The standard life script says you go to school, you get married, you have kids, you buy a house, all that. It's built in the American dream. You're going to have the house, the 2.5 kids, the white picket fence, all that. And that flexibility actually is a huge planning opportunity, and it changes just about everything. So what we look at with our clients is we say, okay, first let's figure out what life you want to live. Then let's figure out your finances. Where others like, I have people reach out to me, when can I retire? And I said, do you want to retire? They go, no. Then why are we talking about that? There's a standard script. And what that does is it flips everything in financial planning on its head. So great example of this, a lot of child-free folks don't really have a goal for passing on a certain amount of money. So they want to die with zero and bounce their last check. If that's the case, Monte Carlo simulations, which are all based on how not to run out of money, everything's inverted. So it starts changing everything. Life insurance changes, long-term care, disability. It changes just about every area of your financial plan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. And we talked about this a little bit. I came in as well, the XY path, and really always focusing on the idea of accumulation, right? As a financial planner, I want to add value via accumulation. But there's this whole other side of the financial planning spectrum where you're talking about decumulation. How do you actually use your resources? Because ultimately, that's what we want to use money for, right? To use it as a tool to enhance our lifestyle. So I think it's great that you are focusing on those things. And I would want to ask a little bit more about, how are child-free people, what are some ways they are creating a life of fulfillment and purpose and maybe using that money as a tool? Just to give you some perspective, I tend to work with younger folks in their 30s, and so they maybe don't know exactly what they want yet, and so it's really just about flexibility, and they're still discovering that. But I'd like to hear from your experience, maybe if there are some people that have figured out different ways, what those ways might be.
The truth is, most people don't have a clue what they want to do with their life. I always ask people, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it has nothing to do with age. I got people in their 60s, I'm asking that same question. And the child free folks, we can actually get to a point we call the child free midlife crisis, where you hit your personal, professional, financial goals, kind of like what you've started off with. And then you're like, so now what? And I've got people in their 30s, 40s in it. And they're like, what's the next 40 years of my life look like? Don't know. But then that's where it becomes really interesting. And it's part of the reason why we use an advice only model and are focused on helping people learn. Because the truth is, if we made a plan, it's going to be wrong in 6 or 12 months. There's
Mhm.
just not an exact. So we have a process we call FILE, financial independence, live early. So it's kind of question of, all right, how do we achieve financial independence, which is just the basics, foundational stuff, get out of debt, have some money, have some good ideas with it. But then how do we live our life early and say, okay, what's the right amount of work to do at the right level at the right time? And I'll give you an example of this. One of our top downloaded podcasts actually is I'll Make You Quit Your Job. And that's because a lot of folks are doing a job they're miserable at. I'll
Mm.
talk to them like, oh, I'm making $150,000 a year. And I'm like, cool. And they're like, I hate my job. I'm like, all right. So what you just told me is for $150,000 a year, you're willing to be miserable. And they're like, I didn't say that. I'm like, no, that's what you just said. And what happens is it takes almost like a reprogramming to say, do you enjoy it? No. Well, then how about we do something you enjoy? How about you take a job that pays half as much? It puts off your retirement, which by the way is not a goal for you, but
Right.
you're happy. And that's hard. I've tracked it. We spend more time with our clients talking about spending than saving.
Mhm.
And that's just not where the financial planning world usually is. And what we're trying to do is we're really trying to optimize for joy. I call it Marie Kondoing your life. You get rid of the things that don't bring you joy and do more of the things that do. But the problem is we don't ask those questions of each other. What do you enjoy? What would you do if money didn't matter? What? And everybody's like, but I have to do this for money. No, you don't. Because for child free folks, there's a point in their life where every dollar they're earning is going to their estate, which is not a priority. So it's a problem. Where like you could actually earn too much money, which
Right.
really starts to mess with people's heads.
No, absolutely, and like I said, I think it's a new shift in the industry, and you touched on it only as you mentioned that you're advice only, and I'd like to just have you can you explain that to the audience? What is advice only, and why is that important for the people you serve?
Yeah. So the way we do it is we don't do investment management for them. Instead, we'll look over their shoulder. So literally what we do is log in your Vanguard account. We'll tell you buy, sell this, do whatever, but they maintain their accounts. They maintain control. We follow simple, passive, long-term investing, nothing fancy. But what that allows us to do is spend the time on the other stuff. So in finance, there's kind of like this general rule that 80% of your success with finance is your behaviors. Okay. So let's spend 80% of our time there. Yet most financial planners spend 80% of their time on the investment, the money, and 20%
Mhm.
of time on the behaviors. So our focus, the way we say it, is we are a learning organization that does financial planning. We help people learn. We don't do it for them. We do it with them. We're at their side. We'll look over their shoulder. We'll be there. But we follow the rule that you only invest in things you understand. So we help them understand it. They can't understand it. We don't do anything fancy. We're not doing that because it doesn't help or improve their life.
Right.
The unfortunate truth is boring investments work. You don't need them to be sexy. And if you're, our way of looking at it is we want your finances to be simple so your life can be amazing. And to do that, you have to learn. And the truth is in the US, we don't do a great job of teaching people finance. It's
Mhm.
terrible, actually, is the honest truth. I, in high school, the only thing that taught me was how to balance a checkbook, which is a giant waste of time. And we will meet with our clients usually on kind of a monthly basis. And each month we work on one or two issues. And because our child free folks' lives are changing so much, we'll get their plan in place. We'll be 6 or 12 months in. And they're like, oh, yeah, by the way, I decided I'm moving to Thailand. You're like, oh, okay. Where did that come from? Like, literally, I had that conversation last week. I'm like, my family there. I'm like, okay, cool. That's fine. But we didn't have that anywhere in the plan. Let's change everything. Or, hey, by the way, I'm go live in a van for a year and travel. Okay, cool. Or I'm going to start my own business. So only way you can work with clients that are that flexible in their life is to build their skills around finance rather than just doing it for them.
No, I love that so much. The idea of educating them, teaching them, and then the fact that you're doing that advice only model where you're not requiring investment assets to manage, I think is hugely valuable and a lot different than the industry. And I think it also lends itself to that concept of die with zero, where you're not necessarily incentivized to maybe gather assets because you're compensated on that. And so I don't want to go down that whole route of advisor fee compensation, but I think that's a great thing. And I would agree on everything you're saying as far as behavior and investing. And sounds like you're doing amazing work. I want to touch on, you mentioned again the financial independence live early that you speak about, file. Some people are familiar with the fire idea, financial independence retire early, right? Where they've saved up maybe let's say 25 times their living expenses and they're extracting 4% of their assets. How would you say a file mindset differs from that fire mindset, which is seems to become more popular these days?
Yeah. So when we look at file, there's kind of two parts. There's financial independence, which is all the same. And if you, and people that are in the fire community will say it's very close to coast fi or slow fi. I'm okay, cool. Pick whichever term you like. But when you add in that die with zero component, it starts changing the math and changing the way you live life. I'm sure you have clients that are in that fire mindset. Is that fair?
Yeah, they're more sabbatical. Maybe they had a windfall with equity compensation. They're probably gonna go back to work at some point, but yes.
That's exactly the point. The fire community has this thing of what happens when the dog catches the car? What happens when you retire at 40 and then what do you do with the rest of your life? Or 30 or whatever it is. And if you actually look at are people enjoying their quote unquote retirement, the data's not great. Okay. So they say, okay, I'm going to go back to work and do something I enjoy. I say, okay, if you're going to do that, then we're not on a fire path. We're not on a retirement path. Because if you're going to have income throughout your life, that's going to change the entire financial plan. Even if you're going to die with zero, that changes all the assumptions. So take the 4% rule example. 4% rule is the goal is to not run out of money. Well, that doesn't work. So instead, what we do is we actually will set guardrails. We set a kind of a cushion at the end. Long-term care, we'll have a solution. Social Security put off a little cash, but we'll
Mhm.
set a guardrail method for the minimum spend versus the maximum spend and say, all right, how do we optimize this throughout life? And if you're going to work throughout life, cool, then we can't do the standard retirement planning. So we're not going to have the down period where we can do the Roth conversions. There's going to be all these things that changes because what happens is people talk about barista fire. I'm going to go do some work, but I'm retired. I'm like, if you're working, you're not retired. Like just terminology thing. Cody
Yeah.
Garrett calls fire financial events recreational employment. I'm like,
Mm.
all right, we're getting close now. But it changes the assumptions and it changes your mindset. So your goal isn't, hey, I'm going to shut off work and never do it again. My belief is Gen Y, Gen Z, you're going to see a lot less people retiring, going to the golf course 20 and just not doing
Right.
anything. So if that's the case, it changes all of the planning before it.
No, absolutely, and I think this is the future of financial planning, in my opinion, is that, first of all, if you are using your assets to create an income stream in your 30s or 40s, you may live another 60 years, so I do think it's a little dangerous, even if you're going off a 4% rule, to assume that's gonna work just because it's so much uncertainty and so many variables over that time frame, and like you're saying, I think it's in a fulfillment standpoint, it's gonna be much better for you to use your money along the way and plan for maybe taking breaks as opposed to, "Hey, let's achieve this arbitrary number where we can just stop."
And another example is I have a lot of folks, I don't know why, but for whatever reason, want to quit their corporate job and go be like a librarian. And let's be real, they're going to go from six-figure salary to not much. The librarians don't get paid well, but they would enjoy it more. Like, let's do it. Now, the hard part is you've always been taught you got to always go up the ladder? Why would you go away from this? You got the training in this, you got the history in this, but are you happy? And the argument I start making is, can we get a better return on investment by investing in you rather than the stock market? What does that mean? It means taking a sabbatical, or with couples, we have approach we call the garter and the rose, where one's providing support and one's growing.
Mm,
Whatever that looks like, the truth is we're going to get better return on investment investing in you than the stock market. But the fire community is very kind of stuck on, you have to have these returns, saving rates, and all this. And it's not wrong. It's just a different way of thinking.
yeah,
And all of our culture is based on, you got to have more money, got to have more money, got to have more money. I'm like, no, you don't.
I love that so much. That makes a ton of sense. I heard you mention the gardener and the rose. I'd love to hear more about that, what that looks like.
Yeah. So this is something I use a lot with the child free folks. Some parents can embrace it too, but really what we find is, and my wife and I use this garden roast approach ourselves. If you have two people that are trying to go at the top of their career levels, it's very hard to make life work. And that's much of our society is still based off the days where one person went to work and one person stayed home. Let's just be real. There's support
Mhm.
stuff that needs to get done.
Sure.
In the gardener the rose approach, what we do is say, okay, everybody takes turns in the couple and says, this is my turn to grow. This is your turn to provide support. And it's a conscious decision. So great example of this. When you have two PhDs and you're trying to find careers together, they actually have a concept they call the trailing spouse. So one gets the job and then one gets the leftovers. And it works as long as you're consciously making that choice. My wife got a job offer. It was 1,200 miles away. Cool. Pack up the dogs. Let's move. No big deal, because she's the rose right now. I'm in the support role. Then our plan is somewhere around probably about 10 years from now, we're going to switch. When I become the rose, we're actually going to get in a boat and travel the world. It doesn't mean you have to grow in money. It means you are taking the turns between it. Now, what I find and what's interesting is the person that needs to be the rose often doesn't admit it. So the gardener is kind of like, yep, my wife, my husband asked to do this like we did. And there's that moment where, like, look, they've needed to quit their job for the past 3 years and do something different.
Mm,
And we don't get it. And I had somebody on my podcast with a client. She was working a state job with a pension, been there a decade. And that's kind of like the job, like you never leave state jobs because just you got guaranteed everything, but kind of not loving the world. She quit, took a 6 month sabbatical. Actually, in the end, she found out she wanted to write, wrote her first novel. She's now out selling it. And I asked her, I said, how you do it? And authors are a great example. They either make no money or a lot of money. There's nowhere in between. And she's like, look, not making a lot of money right this second, but love it. That's the garden and the rose. So she's the
mm,
rose. She's doing this. He's providing support. Cool. And at some point, it'll switch. Perfect. The key part is the communication and being clear about the roles and
mm.
being clear about we're going to take turns, because then it allows the rose to be a little selfish and worry about their issues. And the gardener can provide support knowing we're going to take that flip. And what ends up happening is I've seen people try to do both at the same time, and I've yet to see it work, because either one has to make sacrifice for the other, and we're not consciously doing it. We're constantly, we got some resentment. There's all different things, where instead, if we have a plan, we both can be growing. It's just at different times.
No, absolutely. I love that so much. And that's where the value of having kind of that financial partner and the financial planner. I've seen this as well working with couples is really just getting on the same page because money is such a emotional subject and there's so many kind of built-in biases with that that it's if you have a plan, you talk through it, right? Then you don't feel selfish about being the rose. And so I love that. I'm gonna have to definitely dig deeper into that because that makes a ton of sense to me. Cool. So digging into this again, life planning aspect, what are some unique risks that maybe child free people may experience over the course of their life? You touched on long term care and the idea that you do want to dial a zero, but you may have these end of life care costs. What are some other risks, or I mean, including that one as far as maybe specific to child free folks?
Yeah. One of the most common questions we get as child free folks is, if you say, hey, I don't have kids, they go, who's going to take care of you when you're older? And I kind of have a love-hate thing going on with this question because what I hate about it is it has all these implied things. So there's what's implied in there is, hey, if I have kids, they're going to take care of me. And let me give you some real numbers on this. So the US Census looked at adults over 55, and they found that in childless adults over 55, 2.5% got any financial support from their family. So that's like nothing. Let's just be honest.
Mm,
In the same sample, 55 and older adults in the US, they looked at parents and found that 1.5% got any financial support from their family. So the actual truth of it is nobody gets any financial support from their family. Just is kind of how it works. The difference is we know we have to do it. The thing that's keeping me up at night, and I'm working on a solution right now for this, and hopefully end of this year I'll have it out, is the question of who makes decisions for you when you don't have next of kin? Who's that power of
mm,
attorney, financial power of attorney, medical power of attorney, executor, trustee, whatever it is. And in some states like Georgia, there's an attorney. In California, you can do a professional fiduciary. Arizona, you can also, but then much of the country, you can't. There's no real solution for this. There are trustees that'll do it, but they only do it if you got 10 million plus. So it
right.
becomes this problem of who's going to, my nightmare is my wife and I get a car crash. Who's going to make the medical decision for us? Who's going to pay our bills? And who's going to let our dog out? Those sound simple, but those are big questions.
Absolutely.
And it's one of those unique risks. That the other part of this is the actual question of who's going to care for you and the money and all. Yeah, that. My child free folks, our goal is by 45 to have a solution for long term, which could be money put aside, could be long term care insurance, could be some mixture, but you have to have a plan.
Mm,
The truth is, parents should do the same thing too, but
yeah.
we're just acutely aware of it. And long term care right now is about $115,000 a year for a skilled nursing facility for a single row.
Mm,
Women will spend 3.7 years in care, men 2.2. So we're talking for a couple, $4.5 million today.
mm,
And the costs are increasing by 5% a year. It's just astronomical for somebody in their 30s and 40s. It's millions of dollars a year when you do the math.
right.
And the system's broken. The system needs to get fixed. That's a different issue, way beyond here, but we need a solution for it. The problem is long-term care insurance is really expensive. It's like, if you pay it up front, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right.
It's hundreds of thousands of dollars because it's millions of dollars of risk at the end. And it's just this hard balance to find. So we work with our clients saying, all right, what are your wishes? What do you want? What do you want the end of your life to look like? And we're having these conversations with the people. I had somebody, they were 29. You can't get a long-term care quote until you're 30. She had to wait until she hit 30 before we could actually answer this. It was freaking
Mm,
her out. And I don't blame her. So we have these worries. And the answer is we figure out a plan. And people ask the question, well, who's going to take care of older? My answer is your financial plan with our help. We
mm,
can
mhm.
actually be there for you. And I think it's one of those things that we all need to be thinking about. But
Yeah.
if you look at the recommendations on long-term care, think about it in your 50s. It's more expensive then. And your parents' health impacts your costs. Like it's all of these things. So we have to do it a whole lot earlier.
No, that makes a ton of sense, especially on the estate planning side. And the idea that, I mean, estate planning is important for everybody to an extent, but I can understand that it's more front and center when you don't have maybe children that are going to be thinking about you right later in life. And so these are major risks to talk through. And I guess so just generally speaking, is there any other like technical aspects of financial planning or investing that you think about differently that we haven't touched on?
Yeah. So watch this. So if you're going to die with zero, I can make an argument that investing in, I don't know, just bonds or high yield savings works for you. Because if you don't care about how much it goes, you could go the completely safe bet.
Mm,
On the flip side, I could also go put every 100% in stocks because it doesn't matter. If it goes up too much or goes up too little, it's fine, which starts messing with people's heads. And you start saying, okay, we really don't need to do anything fancy for our investments because we don't. We could just do simple investing. And it starts changing basic assumptions. Let's go down the insurance path again. Life insurance. Really, if nobody's counting on your salary, there's very little or no need.
right.
On the flip side, disability insurance is a huge priority. So 32.1% of childless folks will never marry. If you're single, no kids, disability insurance is an absolute must. I mean, Social Security disability will pay you, like, I don't know, $1,000 a month or something. It's like
Yeah.
barely that. You have to have a plan for disability insurance. Now, here's the thing. I had a client and I sent them to their broker that they like for insurance. And I said, get a quote for disability insurance. They didn't have it. And they walked out with 5 quotes for life insurance. And
Mm,
I'm like, what the heck happened? What happened was the insurance company makes money selling life insurance. They make no money selling disability insurance.
right.
And what happens is all of these assumptions get built in there and they just don't fit to the point where if you're child free, my advice is if you're going to work with a financial planner, ask them how your plan is different because you're child free.
Mhm.
If they say it's not different, you just need to walk out. If they say you're going to change your mind, once you got to walk out. If they say, I don't know how it's different, I'm actually okay with that answer. We can learn that. Or if they say,
Right.
let's figure it out, I'm okay with that. But what happens is like, if you look at our software, Capital is the software I use for financial planning right now, just recently made a change to allow couples to be in there and not be married
I saw that, yeah.
or married filing separately. Huge. I've got people living in groups, different family structures. The financial planning software is not built for it. I There are some days I make Right Capital scream because like I'm over here hacking it into getting what I want out of it. But it's just what you have to do. And if your financial planner doesn't understand how to do that, it can be an issue.
No, absolutely, and you're right, a lot of the tools are not built for child free. I mean, that was a big one I noticed as well is because 'cause I'll work with younger couples sometimes who they're just not married yet, and it's they're but we wanna do the joint planning, and the taxes are not gonna be correct because it's assuming they're married filing jointly. So, I can see and then again with the insurance as well, right? They're not gonna think about if you're going to an insurance company, right, you always have to consider their incentives. And if they're just giving you these kind of blanket advice, generic advice, then that's not going to pertain to your situation as child free. So awesome. Let's see. What else do we have on here? What's your personal goals, I guess, as far as what you want to do with the practice, where it's headed? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, we are moving to a what's closer to a family office model where we're going to be the whole, you call us whenever you have a problem. And we're partnering with a trust company to actually do the estate components, the end of life, power of attorney, trustee, all that. So we're going to get to a point where anytime you have a life financial estate problem, all that, you just call us to the point where in your emergency contact, in your medical form, it says call us. And we're doing that because of this huge question of what do you do with our next kids? So we're going to be a child free person's family is where we're going. And we're doing that because there's such a huge need. The challenge with that is if you look at the US, there's about 4.4 million child free millionaires in the United States. Let's just go with people with $1 million net worth or better. If we really worked hard, we might be able to serve 1% of those.
Mhm.
Still leaves 99% of the market that is unserved. Our goal is really to serve 1% of those folks, which would make us a huge firm. We're onboarding staff, we're onboarding people, and we have a new book coming out at the end of the year, the Child Free Guide to Life and Money, and we're putting this out there because it's such a huge need. And i- if you're not watching the podcast, when I said to TJ, I'm going to try to serve 1%, that's 44,000 people. Like his face almost blew up.
That's a lot
That's
of
kind
people.
of what but we're doing that. And honestly, I'm more worried about the 99% we can't serve because the question of who takes care of me throughout my life and how we do this. So I'm out there talking to financial planners. Here, child free people are here. They're 25% of your clients. Here's how to serve them. And then we're talking to child free people and saying, hey, here's what you need because it's such a huge underserved population.
No, absolutely. And I appreciate you coming on the podcast today because I myself do have couples that plan on being child free. And so I definitely want to make sure that I am factoring in these things. And it's even better to work with somebody who maybe that'll be some referrals your way in the future is like someone who specializes in that. But basically, my question is why do you think people are choosing the child free route more and more? I mean, you've touched on it a little bit today, but I just love to hear your personal opinion on why that's becoming more of a chosen path.
So the data is not great. We don't have great data, but I did a survey on this about a year and a half ago. And what I found is most people, when they choose to be child free, it's for a variety of reasons. So we have people just, don't want to have kids, finances, medical reasons, political reasons, environment, not want to pass on trauma, not want to, I mean, really well thought out reasons. We also have a population that are child free, not by choice. They might have wanted to, but for whatever reason, either situations or things. Other thing we're finding, there's an interesting study out of Michigan. They looked at the they looked at adults over 18 and questions, do you want to have kids? Are you planning on having kids? All that questions. And they looked at it pre and post the Roe overturn. And what they found was the percentage of child free went from 20% to 26% because of one political issue.
Mm.
Now, I'm not trying to get all political and I'm not recruiting people to be child free. I don't, the way I say it is I don't get a vote in your life. You don't get a vote in mine, whatever it is. And what you're finding is the younger generations, your generation, Gen Y, Gen Z,
Mhm.
are pausing and going, do I want kids? The older generations, it was just expected, just what you did. And I've gotten that pressure in all different ways, and whether it's culture, family, religion, other things. It's just a norm. You do have kids. That's just part of the plan. Where now I truly believe the younger generation is going, okay, that's an option. There's also an option not to. And they're weighing the choices. It's not saying one's better or different or worse, it's just different. And when
Right.
you get to this question of what life do you want to live? Cool. The other part of it is, let's be real. It's really expensive to have kids.
It is, yeah. It is.
$18,000 a year on average. Okay. And I always laugh at, there's the pundits out there and Dave Ramsey, I come out of, I'm a no debt person. He talks about no debt for everything. But when it comes to having kids, he's like, well, whenever God wills, you just do it. And I'm like,
Mhm.
anything else in your life, if you were planning for $18,000 a year for the next 18 years, you would have a financial plan for.
Right.
That's
Right.
like, people sit down and do the math and like, wow, is this expensive? And we'll always get people that say, what if you regret it being child free?
That's what yeah.
And my answer is, you know what? I'd rather regret being child free than regret having a kid.
That's
The
true.
actual published data is 17% of parents admit parental regret.
Wow.
The most honest I've heard from a parent was, I love my kid. I hate being a parent. I was like,
Mhm.
that's really deep. What's happening is the younger generations, they're like, look, I'm going to make an informed choice. And the best I've heard is if you're going to have kids, it has to be two enthusiastic yeses. If as the couple, one of you is, I don't really want to, or I'm not sure, and one's yes,
Yeah.
that's a resentment question. If you're both yes or both no, perfect. And actually, it's gotten to a point now. One of my staff members is out in the dating market where it's actually a choice on the apps. Do you plan on having kids? Because it's a great question.
It's
You
a
know,
really
it's
good question to filter people.
a better question. Which height do you like? What do you like? And I'm like, oh, it's a good thing to have that discussion.
No, absolutely. It definitely changes the whole course of your life, and yeah, obviously, I think it's I was wondering if you had situations where maybe somebody did change their mind later on. I don't know if that's ever a thing
So
that happens.
I had somebody from my book. He's 100% child free. Got married. His wife is child free. Wife changed her mind. This is an interesting one. What happens when somebody changes in the middle? And I asked him, I said, look, what did you do? He's, I kind of did some soul searching and he decided to try to have kids because he figured he doesn't want her to be miserable. He'll work his system around. He'll change his life to work through. And it happened to be that for fertility issues, they didn't end up having kids. But it was really an interesting question of, do you change your own perspective? And what I've come to the conclusion of is for a relationship to really work, the key is compatible baggage. We all have baggage we bring to things. And if you can accept the baggage and you can change, cool. If you can't, that's okay too. Like, just be honest of it. Have that communication and say, no, I live a no debt life. My wife decided all of a sudden she wanted to rack up credit card debt. We're going to have a problem. It just
Right.
is. I'm not going to be able to accept it. And I'm not judging her. It is. And I think what happens in couples is we all, when we're dating, kind of hide a little bit. Let's be honest in that. And I heard somebody else I interviewed for the book, and I haven't dated in 15 years, so I don't know nothing about dating, but she had a great example. She realized the question of do you want to have kids is a bad question to ask in dates. The question she asks instead is how many kids do you want?
Mm,
Because give an answer of do you want kids or not, you're kind of like going off what the other person's vibe is. If your
right.
answer is 0 or your answer is 3, okay, I got your answer. I
Yeah,
was like, ooh, I love
that's
that
smart.
question.
That's a great yeah.
And what it is like we try to make our spouses happy. We try to make compromises, but having a kid is not a compromise. That's a lifetime choice. Or not having a kid, same thing. And we just need to figure out what the right combo is.
No, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. Cool. So, yeah, basically, the last question I ask every podcast guest is what is one tip for doing more with your money? It can be a technical, it can be non technical. If you had to give one tip, what would that be?
My one tip is I'm going to talk about money in your job. The thing I tell all my clients is pick a job you would do for free, then get paid for it. If you can do that, we can make good money or not. Like, depends on what field. I mean, you pick a job that's got a good field, it makes money, cool. But you're choosing the job because you enjoy it. Now, the problem people is say, but the job I want doesn't pay. That's okay. We just need to adjust your expenses. If you want to pick a job that doesn't pay, but it makes you happy, cool. I had somebody who was a medical resident, second year resident. So he's already passed medical school. Yeah, 1 year left, struggling. And he came to me and I came out of healthcare originally. And I'm like, what's going on? We worked together for a couple months. So come to find out, his family wanted him to be a doctor. He never wanted to. And I said to him, I said, look, are you going to spend the rest of your life doing something your family wanted rather than what you want? And what he really wanted to do was art. And art, by the way, doesn't pay. I mean, let's just be honest with that. It just doesn't. So we worked with him and I saw him about 6, 12 months later. He was all happy. I'm like, what happened? He says, I quit being a doctor. I went and do art.
Wow.
He's like, I'm making nothing. My family's mad at me. I'm happier than ever. I'm like, "Hey, you did the
Sounds
right
like a win.
choice.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, his family actually paid for his medical school, so he didn't have the loans. But I'm like, we get so stuck in, we got to follow this path. And really, for our careers, we're following a decision the 18-year-old version of us made, which was a really
Mhm.
dumb version of us. Okay, let's be real.
Right.
The 18-year-old version of us knew nothing. I don't care what age you are now, they didn't. So if you're going to spend a third of your time working, you better enjoy it.
I love it. No, that's amazing. That's the best way you can do more with your money is start by enjoying something that helps you make the money in the first place. And then you've solved a third of that question right there. Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Jay, for coming on today's podcast. This has been super insightful. If people want to follow up with you on social media, what is your preferred platform?
So we're kind of old school. We got the website, childfreewealth.com, Child Free Wealth podcast everywhere, and Child Free Wealth on Instagram.
Excellent. I will make sure to link to all of those in the show notes. And thank you again so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.